Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Did you know that nearly 65% of Americans are considered to have inadequate magnesium intake on a daily basis? This is incredibly problematic when we look at all of the functions of this very important mineral in the human body. And if we're not getting adequate exposure, then it certainly makes sense that we would want to be supplementing with magnesium. So today I want to talk about magnesium when it comes to cardiovascular health and why this is so important. I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and let's get right to it. Yes, when it comes to magnesium deficiencies and insufficiencies in this country, we certainly recognize that this is a major problem. Estimated, as I mentioned, about 65% of Americans have inadequate magnesium intake. And this is coming from the PLOS One journal, which is a very well-regarded scientific research journal. And what they were doing is they were looking at magnesium status across the spectrum from over 19 different studies. And they found this very strong correlation between low magnesium levels and the risk of cardiovascular events. Now, when we think about what magnesium is actually doing in the body, we know that it is responsible for over 300 different enzymatic processes within the human body. So we know that this is playing an integral role in our day-to-day functioning. Now, as we get older, as with everything, we can start to see less and less intake coming from the diet, but also in terms of absorption rate. So it's estimated that over 80% of people who are over the age of 70 years old have inadequate dietary intake of magnesium. Now, this is a problem because as we get older, we are, of course, at a greater risk for a cardiovascular event. And you think about that, you think about the wear and tear that happens throughout our vascular system as we age. So understanding that heart disease is the leading cause of death within the United States, as a matter of fact, it's the leading cause of death worldwide. But there are many different risk factors for heart disease, including we can look at the cholesterol, we can look at smoking, we can look at the aging process itself, we can look at glycation brought on because of diabetes, we can look at obesity, but we also have to look at high blood pressure. So hypertension is the most prevalent risk factor when it comes to heart disease. And we recognize that this is a massive problem here in the United States. The American Heart Association estimates that over 40% of Americans will have high blood pressure in the next 10 years. Over 40% of Americans that means they'll be on medication for high blood pressure within the next 10 years. That is very alarming. And we have to look at how magnesium can play a role into this, because we understand when we think about vasodilation and the blood vessels themselves being more relaxed so that you're getting adequate blood flow through those vessels. This is very critical to your magnesium status. Now, if we have low magnesium, this is going to create a situation where we can end up with more vasoconstriction, because we know that magnesium is a cofactor for all of these hundreds of different reactions that occur throughout the body. Now, one of those reactions leads to the production of prostaglandin E1. Now, this is very important when we think about that vascular relaxation. So this is very, very key. We also recognize that magnesium plays a role even when it comes to hormonal regulation in the body. And so magnesium, in a sense, can help to impact aldosterone release. And so when this happens, this can cause the kidney to hold on to sodium water and hence affecting the blood pressure. So we see all of the different ways in which magnesium is really playing this very critical role when we look at the sympathetic nervous system and the different, fight or flight response. We can look at the different catecholamines and how those play a role into this, and how much magnesium is essential when we're looking at things like epinephrine, for example. Now, looking at the endothelial cells and the role that those are playing when it comes to our maintaining a healthy blood pressure, this is another one of those key areas. When we look at how magnesium helps to support that vascular permeability, and this is really a critical thing, because if we have inadequate or low magnesium, then we're going to have higher amount of permeability into the inner part of the blood vessel lining. And hence, what does that mean? That means we can allow more cholesterol to get into that vessel wall. When this happens, this is when we end up with the plaque buildup, and this will narrow the blood vessels, hence driving up blood pressure. So we see that inadequate magnesium certainly is going to be an incredibly problematic thing. So what do we do? Well, since we know that dietary intake or exposure to magnesium is generally lacking, because when we think about a standard American diet, we're generally not getting a good enough exposure to magnesium. So hence, this is why supplementation with magnesium is so essential, because we know it's required for all of these different hundreds of functions in the body. And if we want to be able to try to help to stabilize or normalize, regulate our blood pressure, magnesium supplementation is certainly going to be very critical in this. And even when we think about the electrical conduction system within the heart, you think about people who have atrial fibrillation, for example, we can look at that inadequate magnesium. I just mentioned that 80% of people over the age of 70 years old in this country likely have inadequate magnesium intake each day. Now, also look at the statistics for people who have atrial fibrillation. This is going to become more and more prevalent over the age of 70 years old. So see how you can connect those dots. Low magnesium can lead to issues with atrial fibrillation or an abnormal heart rhythm. So making sure that we are getting adequate magnesium each and every single day is critical to our overall wellness. Now, how much should you be taking and which form should you take? We offer our magnesium glycinate. We also have our magnesium citrate. We're not changing the magnesium. Magnesium is magnesium. What we are doing is we are changing how it is brought into the system. So when it's bound to citrate, the absorption rate is just a hair greater than when it's bound to glycinate, which is very good when we think about intestinal health. So even for those who have more of a tendency to go through bouts of constipation, perhaps utilizing the magnesium citrate would be ideal. Now, when we think about overall cardiovascular support, I would probably tend to lean more towards that glycinated form so we can get slightly slower absorption rate, which means we can utilize that magnesium into the bloodstream for full action of that magnesium throughout the day. And one thing that we certainly know is with magnesium, it's going to be based off of your current status. So for example, one may find that 200 milligrams per day of magnesium glycinate is sufficient for them. There may be someone else who has to take 800 milligrams of magnesium. The way that you can kind of figure this out is you start low and slow, and as you increase your magnesium, if you have a tendency to end up with loose stools, then you know that you've kind of reached your upper limit. Maybe scale back just a bit. But for the most part, most people, it's going to be somewhere around 400 milligrams of magnesium supplementation each and every single day. So we know that magnesium plays this really critical role in the cardiovascular system, and there is this significant inverse association between the dietary intake of magnesium and the greater likelihood of cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular event. So if we don't get enough magnesium, we are certainly putting ourselves into a position where we can have high blood pressure, we can have abnormal heart rhythms, we can have the stiffening that occurs within the vascular lining, which can lead us open for that plaque formation. We can certainly have the imbalance that occurs with aldosterone, with epinephrine. There are so many different components to which magnesium is helping to regulate our cardiovascular system. So next time that you are thinking about what you should be taking every day, do make sure that you include in some additional magnesium into your daily routine. Because as we know, this is a major problem here in the United States, with over 65% of adults in the U.S. having inadequate magnesium intake each and every single day. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts, or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.